Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Rubrik's first ever Cyber Security Decoded episode. We're really excited you chose to spend time with us. This is going to be a day of firsts for us. Along with us being the first of these episodes, we're also going to discuss today Rubrik Zero Labs' first ever report. It's our state of data security and the human impact of cybercrime. That is going to be an interesting topic for us to spend some time on. But what I'm most interested in today is speaking with our guest, Wendi Whitmore from Palo Alto Unit 42, where she's the senior vice president there. Why I'm really interested to dive into this with Wendi is one of the absolute legends in this field, real practitioner. Started out her career as an Air Force Office of Special Investigation agent on the cyber side when that was a very nascent part of what was happening in the military and government. She went from there to Mandiant, where she was one of the senior leaders that helped grow that into one of the premier incident response firms in the private sector. Transitioned from there into CrowdStrike, where she became a critical leader for CrowdStrike as they grew into a premier organization doing cybersecurity, incident response, intelligence, and threat detection. She was also at IBM, where she was tasked to bring together X-Force Iris and really bring the incident response, managed defense, and intelligence entities together into one large organization. And is currently, as I mentioned before, at Palo Alto Unit 42, where she's the senior vice president in charge of that organization. Wendi, great to see you again. Really excited to have a discussion today.
Hey, thanks, Steve. That was a super comprehensive intro. Really appreciate it and very much appreciate the invite today and look forward to catching up with you today.
Thanks. Well, let's just dive right into it. I mentioned we want to discuss the state of data security, the human impact of cybercrime. One of the things that was really a neat effort for us here at Rubrik, as Rubrik Zero Labs took this on, was we wanted to look at both the threat landscape, but also how are we operating inside that, both as organizations, as teams, and as individuals. And it really allowed us to take a step back and look at that holistically. I know we've discussed as different entities across the industry, each of those areas individually, but it was really great to look at all of that. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to really kind of start with the people side. One of the things that really jumped out to me in particular in this report is, we talked to over 1,600 IT and security leaders, half of them at the CIO and CISO level, the rest at the VP and director level, again, from a range of teams. And one of the things that we asked them was, how is the totality of what you're dealing with affecting you? And what we heard back was 96% of individuals felt, in their words, a significant emotional or psychological impact in the last year. In particular, it was manifesting as stress in their day jobs, lack of sleep, concern about lack of trust amongst their peers or the clients that they serve. So I think what I'd really like to hear from is your experience. How has this affected you and your teams? And what do you see as you work with organizations there at Unit 42?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So I think first and foremost, your report was really interesting. Like I thought some of the stats that came back are pretty unique that I haven't seen in other places. So I was really excited to see that. And I think that this has become very pervasive, right? We've seen that the average tenure of a CISO is about 16 months, which, as you know, in terms of getting on board, bringing your team, implementing technology, making, creating processes that are going to be sustainable from a detection and response perspective, let alone all the other requirements of a CISO, is really challenging. So we're dealing with that there as it comes to incident response work, right, with our clients. And then our team, certainly, it's I've been in the field for over 2 decades now, and it's a bit of a grind, right? When you're responding to breaches, not only are you dealing with a client who is in their, worst day and they're in the middle of an emergency, the work is very fast paced. You got to get answers really quickly. There's tight timeframes when it comes to regulations, getting information back to the executives you're working with. So it certainly is intense. And I think the pandemic, hasn't necessarily done anything to improve that for us, right? We've created a new paradigm in which we work, which is back to back to back to back. And, maybe there's a little less travel. I haven't experienced that myself. Like myself and my teams are really traveling quite a bit again. But, that said, I think that we're still really figuring out what's going to work moving forward to be more sustainable.
You make a really great point with the CISO tenure. One of the things that we saw as well, we asked the same question that we discussed with individuals with impacts on teams. The teams that are having to respond and do the detection work and work with all the things you just mentioned there. And we heard an identical metric come back. 96% of these organizations dealt with a negative impact in the last year from one of these cyber attacks. And some of the things that surprised me was some of the range of it. We definitely saw, loss of customers, loss of revenue. We expected to see those. One of the things that, again, that surprised me was a third of organizations underwent a leadership change in the last year based on the event or a response to it. And I think that while I'm sure it's not the only factor to that 16-month CISO tenure, it definitely has to contribute in that role. I'd be curious to see what's been your experiences with the impacts to organizations. What do you see as you're working in these really tense, difficult moments? How do organizations look on the other side? What are the kinds of things they're enduring once they start getting their arms around the breach?
It's challenging, all these areas that you highlighted, because people and skilled people and leaders are really key to solving these problems. And so when you have as much churn in some of these roles, and it's not just, the CISO, right? It's really who are their peers that now, when you go through a breach, you learn from a leadership perspective how to work together as a team, how to communicate more effectively, how to deal with these challenges. And you learn oftentimes, where are the parts in your organization that are more challenging to get answers from a data perspective and an evidence perspective, and you can work through and solve those problems. And so when you have a constant churn of different employees, again, not just in the CISO role, but in these leadership roles, it does make it more challenging. I think all of that points towards having sustainable technologies that are going to get answers very quickly. And if you are an organization that maybe doesn't have as many of the resources in person and on your team full time, then having an ability to outsource some of that work as needed and have a continuous relationship with an organization so that you do get expert support is really critical.
You just mentioned something that I also heard your CEO mention. He mentioned I'm going to make sure I have it right here because it definitely caught my attention. He mentioned the three fundamental problems that your organization in Palo Alto sees plaguing cybersecurity being fragmentation, too much complexity when analyzing threats, and a lack of platforms. How do you see organizations overcoming these? These are institutional challenges. These are not minor topics. You mentioned a few there, but I'd be really interested in what do you see for how organizations can get through that while they're working active intrusions and also meet the operational realities that they have to deal with?
So one other stat that he mentioned, actually, as he was leading into that part of the conversation, was that there are 7 million unfilled jobs. And that's just as of today within the larger industry. And so in combination, right, with all of these challenges we've mentioned, we also don't have enough skilled resources. And that's plagued the security industry for decades. And unfortunately, I don't see that changing in the immediate sense, right? We're all doing everything we can to get more qualified personnel into the field, to educate children about the field younger, so that we have a really strong pipeline. But all that said, that means that technology, I think, plays an even more critical role. And we, you and I and our teams as technology providers really have a responsibility to create opportunities for technology to be much more operationalized. And when we get into threat intel, one of the things that we say is it's not so much just about having the most or the best threat intelligence. It's what do you do with it? How do you operationalize that data? And that gets to the heart of your question about how do you react during an intrusion? Like, we need to be able to continue to operate as an organization and minimize operational impact to the primary parts of doing your business. And that typically means building a resilient enterprise. And that means being able to work through these challenges while we might be under attack for a while. So building the fabric to do that, having strong threat intelligence, having relationships with the right organizations. And that's everything from certainly from experts, but it's also with peers in your industry, and being able to exchange information really rapidly so that you know what to be searching for, you know how to do it, and then you know who to report and share it to when you get those answers.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we've seen, and I'll reference another part from the report, is we wanted to really understand, is this, especially at that senior leader level, that CIO, CISO level, is this something they're dealing with once a year? Is it not? What's the reality of that? And what we heard back was 98% of those roles are dealing with a cyber attack in the last year, and an average of 47 times in that year. So in essence, let's just round up and say one a week. And I think that really jumps out. Half of those organizations have dealt with a data breach, half have dealt with a ransomware intrusion. And one of the things I'd be really interested in your take on, just from the wide purview that Unit 42 sees, and I know you mentioned this a little bit in your keynote at Ignite, is what are you seeing from that? What are you seeing from the landscape? What jumps out at you? What are you concerned about? I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, I think I'd categorize it as chaos right now, right? What we're going through. So, on the cybercrime side, right? There's new ransomware attacks that are announced every week. You have Lapsus, who is, continuously attacking successfully large organizations with relatively low technology approaches. And these are organizations that are well above the security poverty line, that have made very significant investments in security. You have the Optus breach, where 40 million users' passport information and the equivalent of their social security cards and numbers were released. Cryptocurrency, like $1.5 billion in losses due to breaches, wallet transfers, other types of cyber attacks this year alone. And then, oh, by the way, there's a war going on where that cyber, conflict and the potential to use cyber warfare is a huge element of it. So that's kind of the landscape that businesses are operating under, which is every day really being prepared for, the next opportunity to defend your environment. And so what you have kind of flying under the radar because of that are more increased nation state attacks. And we're not hearing about those in the news. They're not really making the press because largely they're going, under the radar. So you've got nation state organizations who are continuing to compromise and steal and exfiltrate intellectual property in mass from organizations throughout the world, all while, we're all barely kind of keeping up with it, our day jobs.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we've been doing this business a while is really tough. It's tough to not spook people, but also really get this across that it's not that there's a threat to, we look very heavily at the data side, but there's lots of other elements to this. And it's not just, is ransomware trying to prevent you from accessing your data? Are these espionage efforts stealing your data? Lapsus is a great one. I don't think anyone had on the predictions for, a year ago that some of the most formative intrusions in the news were going to be from a group with the skill set or lack thereof of Lapsus. But here we are talking about them all year long. So I think that's been, a real challenge. And I guess the thing I'd ask is, as we kind of wrap up this discussion, which I've really, really enjoyed, as tough as that is, as challenging as the landscape is, as more, in my opinion, it's more pervasive than it's ever been. I am still personally a cautious optimist. Again, having done this long enough, there's a number of things that I see more positive than negative, and not to make light of any of this. These are really difficult challenges. I'd be curious, what's your view? Are you more pessimistic now? Are you more optimistic than you were 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago?
Definitely more optimistic. I like your term of cautious optimism. I think that's a great one. What I tell organizations is that we really at this point need to be prepared for anything. And that doesn't mean everything, but anything to occur. And I think that the reality is that gets back to the best practices and fundamentals of security. And even with those in place, and even with the diversity of attacks we're seeing, best security practices of network segmentation and multi-factor authentication deployed appropriately, having backup systems, available offline as well for your most critical data. All of those type of fundamentals are really keeping organizations out of the news. So while we're hearing about so many of these attacks in the news, there are thousands more organizations who, were potentially compromised by Lapsus, but they got into one system and couldn't do anything else because of the fact that they had great network segmentation, they had great logging of their authentication systems and protocols. So to me, technology is getting better every day. We're building the ability for our clients around the world to be more successful. And if there is one silver lining of the conflict that's going on today, is that intelligence is being shared much more frequently and rapidly, not only between public and private partners, between government and commercial, but also between commercial partners who, may previously have seen each other as competitors. We are sharing information more than we ever have. So to me, that is really exciting.
I agree. It's been really neat to see that change over the years. I mean, the days of each vendor did their own piece and that was it and no one shared, those days are gone. We've all realized that's not how anything works, and we're serving each of our individual clients better working together. In that vein, I really appreciate you coming on, Wendi. Thank you for your time today. And for those on the line, we really appreciate you taking this time to spend a few minutes with Wendi and I, and look forward to seeing everybody down the road.
Thank you, Steve.